Snow swallowed the world until only the lantern's glow remained. Small, trembling, fighting the wind like a prayer refusing to die. Ethan Stone reined in on the ridge, breath freezing in his beard as he stared down at a broken wagon half buried in the drift. Something moved beneath the canvas, weak, desperate, and beside it, Maggie Hart knelt in the storm, dragging a half-frozen woman into the faint circle of light. The woman's wrists were torn raw by rope, her blouse soaked through with frost, and in her arms, God help them, a baby barely clinging to life. Then Ethan saw the thing the storm had almost swallowed, a U.S. Marshal badge lying face down in the snow. Not hers, someone else's, someone hunting her. Before we returned to the moment, Ethan stepped off his horse, and the battle that storm brought to his doorstep. Stay with this story until the very end, and tell me where you're watching from. Snow had a way of swallowing sound out on the high ridge, the kind of silence that made a person think the Lord himself was holding his breath. Maggie Hart kept her head down against the blizzard, one hand gripping the lantern, the other shielding her eyes from the stinging white. Christmas week always felt meaner in Wyoming territory. More wind, more cold, more reasons to pray the night wouldn't take what little you had left. She almost missed the wagon. It lay half buried in the drift beside the frozen fence line. One wheel snapped clean, the other clawing at the sky like some broken animal. Maggie froze. Snow had already begun to swallow the tracks, but not enough to hide the truth. Someone had crashed hard and recently. A canvas flap slapped in the wind. A faint moan threaded through the howl. She moved before she thought. "Hello?" Her voice vanished into the storm. "You hear me?" Another sound came back. Not a word, just breath. Thin, fading. Maggie dropped to her knees, shoved the snow aside with both our arms. Her fingers struck cloth, then skin, cold as river stone. A woman lay half buried under the wagon's shadow, curled tight around something she clutched to her chest. "Lord help us," Maggie whispered. She tried shaking her shoulder. Nothing. Tried again, harder. The woman's lips moved. No sound, just a tremor. "You're freezing," Maggie muttered. "Come on now, don't you quit on me." She hooked her arms under the stranger's and pulled. The woman was lighter than she looked, more bone than weight, but snow fought back with each drag. Maggie pushed her boots deep, heaved, dragged again. The wind tore at her coat, howling like it disapproved of the whole thing. Halfway to the fence line, her lantern light hit something glinting in the snow. A silver badge, U.S. Marshal. Maggie's heart stumbled. She didn't touch it, just brushed more snow aside with a shaking hand. Rope marks, fresh, tracks of a second horse, heavy and fast, cutting away from the wreck. Someone had been hunting this woman. She looked back at the stranger, at the pale face, at the cracked lips, at the thin blouse soaked through with melting frost. "Doesn't matter," Maggie breathed. "You're alive. That's enough for now." She lifted the woman again. Snow stung her eyes, burned her cheeks. At the edge of the paddock, the storm thinned just enough to reveal the warm flicker of firelight from her cabin's side window. "Almost there. You hold on here." A soft noise escaped the woman. Maybe courage, maybe pain. Maggie dragged her the last 30 feet, boots slipping, breath breaking. She didn't stop. Couldn't. If she stopped, The cold would claim them both. She should have run for Ethan first, but there wasn't time. Not with breath that shallow, not with skin turning that color. By the time she reached the lean-to beside the barn, her arms shook from the weight. Her lungs scraped raw. She lowered the woman against the plank wall, wiped frost from her face. That's when she saw it. The stranger wasn't clutching a blanket. She was clutching a bundle wrapped in torn cloth. Maggie's breath hitched. "Is that? Lord have mercy." The bundle moved. Just an inch. A weak, pitiful twitch. A child. Barely more than a babe. Maggie's knees nearly buckled. She tugged the cloth open just enough to see a blue-tinged cheek, lashes stuck with ice. "No, no, no. Stay with me, little one." Her mind raced. Ethan. She needed Ethan now. She cupped her hands around her mouth and shouted toward the cabin through the screaming wind. "Ethan! Ethan!" A door slammed open. Light flooded the yard. A tall shape stepped out, rifle half raised. "Maggie?" Ethan called. "Where are you?" "By the barn," she cried. "Hurry!" His boots hammered across the crusted snow. When he reached them, he stopped short. One look at the collapsed wagon. One look at the woman. Then the bundle. "What in God's name?" "No time," Maggie snapped. "Help me get them inside. Both." Ethan hesitated only a breath, maybe two. Then he holstered the rifle and scooped the woman into his arms, lifting her like she weighed nothing. Maggie gathered the bundle, pressing it close to her coat, sharing what little warmth she had left. As they staggered toward the cabin, the storm howled harder, as if trying to pull them back. Ethan kicked the door shut behind them, locking out the cold. Heat struck immediately, fireplace roaring, supper steam hanging in the air. He turned to Maggie. "Who is she?" "I don't know," Maggie said. "But someone left her to die out there. And she wasn't alone." Ethan stared at the cloth bundle in her arms. Maggie nodded once. "A child, Ethan. She saved a child." And outside, buried again under the storm, the silver badge caught the last flicker of lamplight before disappearing under fresh snow, waiting for whoever would follow its trail. Warmth didn't reach the cabin right away. It hovered in the air, like something unsure of its welcome. Ethan Stone set the unconscious woman down on the rug beside the hearth, then straightened slowly, rifle already in his hands, before Maggie even closed the door. She saw the barrel rise. Fast. Instinct. Protection. "Ethan, no." Her voice cracked from the cold. He didn't answer, didn't blink. His eyes fixed on the stranger stretched before the fire, on the torn blouse, on the frostbite turning her fingertips white. Then his gaze slid to the bundle Maggie held tight against her chest. "What's that?" he asked. "A child." Maggie eased the cloth open, revealing the tiny face. She kept her alive out there. Ethan's jaw tightened the way it always did when something didn't make sense. "You find her by the wreck?" "Wagon snapped clean," Maggie said. "Tracks everywhere. And—" she swallowed. "There was a badge." His grip shifted. "Whose?" "I didn't touch it. Snow covered most of it. Looked federal. Marshal, most likely." Ethan's stare dropped back to the woman, at the rope burns along her wrists, at the bruises blooming across her collarbone. Then he lowered the rifle. Not all the way. Just enough to breathe. She'll die if we don't warm her, Maggie said. Or bring trouble straight through our door, Ethan muttered. But he knelt anyway. He pressed 2 fingers to the stranger's neck. Weak, erratic. He touched her cheek. Ice. Too close to slipping past the point men came back from. His throat tightened. We need her dry. I know, Maggie whispered. Ethan hesitated. Only 1 heartbeat. Then he stood, crossed to the cedar chest beneath the window, the one he hadn't opened in a year, the one still holding Rose's wedding dress, folded careful as prayer. Maggie, he said, voice low, fetch towels. She moved quickly. Better not to speak Rose's name. The Lord knew it still lived in the shadows of this cabin. Ethan lifted the lid. Cold air poured from the chest like the past exhaling. A soft white hem gleamed inside. He reached in slower than he meant to, fingers brushing lace and pearl buttons. The dress felt lighter than memory, as if grief had worn its weight thin. He didn't look at Maggie, didn't look at the woman on the floor, just carried the dress back with the quiet resignation of a man accepting a cost long overdue. Turn her, he murmured. Together they worked, Maggie stripping away the frozen blouse, Ethan cutting the sleeves free before they tore the skin. He didn't let his eyes linger on the bruises, didn't question the rope marks. Those answers could wait. Stopping the cold could not. The stranger shivered once, violently. Ethan swore under his breath. She's slipping. Then hurry, Maggie urged. They wrapped her in the soft white fabric, pulling the warmth of the fire closer. Maggie held the baby near the hearth, rubbing tiny arms until a thin cry broke the silence. Ethan froze, not from fear, from the sound. Life. Real, stubborn life. He exhaled, long and unsteady. Good girl, he whispered. Whether to the baby, to Maggie, or to the woman Alice, he didn't know. A crack echoed outside. Not thunder, not a branch, a hoof. Ethan rose instantly, rifle lifted again, breath turning sharp. Someone's out there? Maggie whispered. Maybe. He moved to the window, staying low, the way a man did when he'd learned too many times that looking first meant dying first. He peeled back the curtain's edge just enough to see the yard. Dark. Empty. Then, another crunch in the snow. Farther off. Moving. Could just be the storm hitting the west fence, Maggie offered. But Ethan shook his head. Storm don't keep rhythm. He crossed to the fireplace, grabbed another blanket, tucked it around the stranger with tight, efficient movements. We need to hide tracks. You saw how deep the drifts were. We do it anyway. He hauled on his coat, grabbed the lantern, and threw the door open. Cold slammed into the house like a curse. Stay inside, he told Maggie. Lock it behind me. Ethan, do it. She obeyed. The click of the lock echoed like a prayer sealed shut. Outside, Ethan crossed the yard, lantern swinging low, erasing every sign of the drag path Maggie had carved through the snow. He kicked fresh powder over footprints, brushed the fence rail clean, scattered the flakes where the badge had been. Behind him, the wind howled. Ahead, the dark waited. And somewhere out in that dark, someone else was listening. Someone who already knew a woman was missing. A wagon was down, and a badge had gone cold under the snow. Inside the cabin, the baby whimpered. The stranger's breath fluttered like a candle fighting to stay lit. Maggie knelt beside her, checking the pulse, whispering the first prayer that came to her lips. Lord, don't let her slip. Not tonight. Ethan didn't hear the words, but he felt them, carried in the wind as he kept sweeping tracks from the snow, cleaning a crime he hadn't committed, for a woman he didn't know. Because the Lord sometimes sent trouble wearing the face of someone who couldn't stand up on her own. He brushed away the last trace, lifted the lantern, and whispered to no one. Whoever's out here, you best keep riding. Warmth crawled back into the cabin slow as a cautious animal. Ethan shut the door behind him, stomped the snow off his boots, and set the lantern on the table. Maggie was still kneeling by the hearth, the baby tucked close beneath her shawl. The stranger wrapped in the wedding dress like someone being carried across two worlds at once. She's warming, Maggie whispered. Ethan knelt beside the woman, touching her forehead with the back of his hand. Still burning, fever clawing deeper. He checked her breathing, thin, uneven, fighting through every rib. She won't last long in wet clothes, he muttered. We've got to finish this. Maggie nodded, though her hands tightened around the baby. The child gave a weak whimper, enough to make both adults look up in the same startled way. She hungry? Ethan asked. Starving, Maggie said. But she's too cold to take milk yet. Ethan exhaled. Everything was hanging by thread. 2 lives, maybe 3 if trouble followed them here. He rose and crossed to the cedar chest again, the one carved with Rose's initials, the one he hadn't touched since the funeral. Candlelight flickered across the lid. His fingers hovered over it, just long enough for the memory to slice through. Rose laughing on their wedding day, spinning in that dress like she believed God had made snow just to watch her dance. He swallowed, pushed the lid open. Cold, lavender-scented darkness waited inside. The dress was gone now, wrapped around a stranger, but the rest of Rose's things lay folded in their rightful place. Shawl, stockings, her Sunday gloves, a quilt square she never finished. Maggie watched from the hearth, saying nothing. She understood this wasn't just a chest. It was a sanctuary he hadn't entered in a year. Ethan grabbed a dry flannel shirt, then paused. Beneath it was the small wooden box Rose used for keepsakes. He hesitated, lifted it. Inside lay a pair of tiny booties, never worn, a reminder of the child they'd buried long before daylight. He shut the box gently and set it aside with reverence instead of pain. Then he found what he needed: thick socks, a wool underdress, and the quilt Rose had pieced for winters that never came. When he turned, Maggie was already unwrapping the stranger's frozen sleeves, working careful so the skin wouldn't tear. She's burning up and freezing at the same time, Maggie said softly. How's that possible? Shock, Ethan answered, or God's mercy giving her one last chance. The woman stirred then, a low sound leaking past her lips. Not a word. More like a memory. Ethan knelt, lifting her gently, careful of the rope burns around her wrists. Maggie helped slide the dry shirt over her shoulders. When they wrapped her in the quilt, the woman shuddered, violent, then still. Ethan's hand shot to her neck. She's breathing, he said. Just faint. Maggie touched his arm. You're shaking. He almost denied it, but his fingers betrayed him. She reminds you of someone, Maggie whispered. Ethan didn't answer. Couldn't. His eyes drifted to the window, to the snow still slamming against the glass like it wanted in. He listened for hoofbeats. Heard none. Not yet. "Let's move her to the bed," he said. Between the two of them, they carried her across the room. The quilt trailed behind like a ghost of another life. Maggie set the baby in the rocking cradle, just close enough for the fire to kiss her cheeks. As the stranger settled into the bed, her fingers twitched. Ethan caught one hand before it slipped away. The nails were cracked. The knuckles cut open like she'd clawed through something or someone. "What kind of storm were you running from?" he muttered. Maggie's gaze drifted toward the door. "The kind that carries a badge." Ethan didn't like the way she said it. Not an hour ago, he'd brushed snow over signs of someone else's hunt. Whoever that man was, he wasn't far, and men who carried badges didn't usually leave unfinished business behind. The woman's lips parted. A whisper escaped. Barely sound, barely breath. "Don't let him." Maggie leaned closer. "Who, honey? Who are you talking about?" The stranger's optim eyes flickered beneath her lids. Her voice cracked like thin ice. "The Marshal." Ethan froze. The air inside the cabin felt suddenly too thin, the fire too loud, the snow outside too quiet. Maggie's eyes widened. "Ethan, I know." He rose, paced once, twice the way a man did when every danger he'd ever known suddenly had a name. He checked the latch, then the windows, then the rifle on the wall. Maggie whispered, "We should hide her clothes, anything that marks her." Ethan nodded once. Quick, sharp. "And the badge. If it's still out there, he'll come straight for it." He crossed the room, opened the door a crack, peered into the storm-black yard. Snow blew sideways in furious sheets, covering footprints faster than he'd ever seen. Maggie pulled the quilt higher around the stranger, tucking it beneath her chin like she would have done for Lily once. Her hands were steady now. Ethan shut the door again. "Until we know who's coming," he said quietly. "No one finds her. No sign she was ever here." Maggie met his eyes. "And if he does come?" Ethan lifted the rifle. "Then the Lord will have to judge which of us is right." The fire had settled into a steady roar, the kind that filled a cabin with both warmth and warning. Maggie laid another log on the flames, careful not to let the baby's cradle drift too far from the heat. The tiny girl stirred, giving a thin, hungry cry, more breath than voice. "Hush now," Maggie whispered. "Warm first, everything else after." She kept one eye on the stranger in the bed. Fever flushed her cheeks. Sweat gathered along the hairline. Her breathing rose and fell in shallow, uneven jerks. Ethan came from the back room carrying Rose's sewing kit. Small tin, rust on the hinges. He set it on the table, flipped it open, and pulled out a curved needle. Maggie turned. "You're fixing her hand?" "Ripped clean through," Ethan said. "If I don't stitch it now, infection will finish what the cold started." He heated the needle in the flame. The metal glowed red, then dulled. "Bring the lamp closer," he said. Maggie obeyed, moving quiet so the baby wouldn't wake again. She watched Ethan kneel by the bed, rolling up his sleeves. His hands didn't shake, not even once. They were the hands of a man who'd buried a wife and a child, who'd carried bodies out of storms, who'd learned the hard way that mercy sometimes required blood. He touched the woman's wrist. Rope burns. Deep, angry grooves circling the skin. "What did they drag you through?" he murmured, more to himself than to her. He pressed 2 fingers to her pulse again. Weak, but there. "Hold the lamp steady," he said. Maggie did. Ethan threaded the needle with a strip of linen torn from the seam of his own shirt. Then he bent over the torn flesh and began to sew. The stranger didn't scream. She didn't jerk or pull away. Only her breath hitched when the needle pushed through. Maggie saw Ethan pause once, just long enough to whisper, soft, almost like a prayer, "Lord, guide my hands." Then he continued. Outside, wind slapped the walls hard enough to rattle the shutters. Snow hissed under the doorframe. Maggie tightened her shawl around her shoulders and listened for hoofbeats she prayed she wouldn't hear. "Ethan," she whispered. "Who would do this to her?" "Same sort of man who leaves tracks without a body," he muttered. "Same sort who carries a badge and thinks it makes him God." He tied off the last stitch and sat back on his heels. The woman's lashes fluttered. A faint tremor ran through her fingers. "Good," he said softly. "Means she's still fighting." But the tremor didn't stop. Her breath turned sharp, ragged. Fever had sunk its claws deeper. Maggie reached for the basin, wringing out a cloth to lay across the woman's brow. "Ethan, she's burning up." "We bring it down slow," he said. "Cold cloth, warm fire. Keep her drinking when she wakes." The baby whimpered again, louder this time. Maggie turned, lifting her from the cradle. Tiny fists opened and closed against Maggie's chest. "Hush, little one. I know." The baby's cry rose, a thin, trembling sound that filled the cabin with something tender, something near holy. The stranger's breathing shifted at the noise. Then her lips moved. Maggie leaned in. A tune slipped out. Broken. Barely a whisper of melody. But familiar. Too familiar. "Maggie?" Ethan asked. She shook her head slowly, eyes widening. "Ethan, she's humming it." "Humming what?" "That song. The one Rose used to sing to Lily. Softly, softly through the pines." Ethan's breath caught. The needle in his hand stilled. "That's not possible." But the stranger kept humming, the tune stumbling but real, like something she'd clung to while running for her life. The melody drifted through the cabin, threaded into the crackle of the fire and the moaning wind. Maggie shifted the baby, rocking her gently. "She knows it, Ethan," she whispered. "How would she know Rose's song?" He didn't answer. His jaw locked. His gaze dropped to the woman's face, as if searching for something he feared finding. Maggie laid the baby back in the cradle, then moved to tuck the quilt around the stranger's shoulders. "She's meant to be here," Maggie said quietly. "Storm or no storm." Ethan stood abruptly, walking to the window. He pulled the curtain aside just enough to see the yard. Dark. Silent. But the kind of silence that carried a warning. "Her knowing a song doesn't explain who's hunting her," he said. "No," Maggie agreed. "But it explains why she fought to keep that baby alive." Ethan didn't turn. "What are you saying?" I'm saying, Maggie murmured, a woman don't hum a lullaby she doesn't know. And she don't shield a child unless she's protecting more than herself. Ethan let the curtain fall back into place. He looked at the stranger again, at the stitched hand, at the quilt around her shoulders, at the faint rhythm of the lullaby engraving itself into the walls of his cabin. Maggie spoke the truth he wasn't ready to say aloud. Someone out there wants her dead, but whatever she's carrying, whatever she's running from, the Lord sent her here first. A sudden thud hit the side of the cabin, snow falling from the roof, nothing more. But Ethan grabbed his rifle anyway. Maggie didn't flinch. She simply whispered, "She's here for a reason." And for the first time since they dragged her out of the blizzard, the stranger's breathing steadied, just a little, as if she'd heard the words and agreed. Morning didn't come gently. It pushed through the cabin windows in a hard gray beam, slicing across the floorboards like judgment. Ethan had slept sitting upright in the chair by the bed, rifle leaning against his leg, boots still on. Maggie dozed by the cradle, one hand draped over the edge to keep the baby close. The stranger stirred first. A quiet gasp, sharp as a stitch breaking. Her eyes fluttered, blinked, tried to focus. Ethan straightened before she fully woke, hand sliding closer to the rifle, but not taking it. "You're safe," he said. "For now." Her body tensed anyway. "Easy," Maggie whispered. "You're in our home. You collapsed by your wagon. Blizzard nearly took you." The woman's gaze darted around the room, fire, cradle, Maggie, Ethan, like she was counting routes of escape before remembering she couldn't stand. Ethan leaned forward. "Name." Her throat worked. No answer. He tried again. "Can you speak?" A pause. Then the faintest whisper. "Clara." Maggie edged closer. "Clara, sweetie, you nearly froze out there. We had to stitch your hand. Fever's broken a little. Baby's warming too." At the word baby, Clara's eyes shot to the cradle. She tried to sit up, panic flaring like a spark in dry grass. "Easy." Ethan pressed a steady hand to her shoulder. "She's alive." Clara sagged back, breath trembling, chest rising in shallow bursts. Maggie placed the baby in her arms. Clara curled around the child instantly, as if her bones remembered the shape even if her mind was fogged. Ethan watched the way she held that baby, instinct, not performance, protector, not fugitive. But rope burns and bruises didn't lie either. He waited until she met his gaze. "Tell me who you're running from." Clara swallowed, voice barely a thread. "I only need one night." Ethan's brow tightened. "That isn't an answer." "Please." The words scraped out, raw. "One night, then I'll go." Maggie shook her head. "You can't even walk, honey." "I can." Clara tried to pull herself upright. Failed. "I have to." Ethan's voice dropped low. "Tell me why." Silence stretched long enough to cut. When Clara finally spoke, her voice sounded like someone dragging their truth over broken glass. "I'm his wife." Ethan didn't move, didn't breathe. "Whose?" Maggie asked softly. "The Marshal." Wind clawed at the window as if it heard the word too. Ethan sat back slowly, rifle still within reach. "Marshal who?" Clara tried to wet her lips, but there wasn't enough strength behind the gesture. Marshal Voss. Maggie's breath caught. Ethan's jaw locked. Clara looked at both of them in a way that said she'd been through this moment before. Saying his name, watching faces change. "My wagon didn't crash," she whispered. "He ambushed me. Said I was ungrateful. Said I forgot my place." Maggie's hands twisted in her skirt. Ethan's voice stayed steady, but it had the edge of a blade being drawn. Why would he do that to his own wife? Clara's eyes dimmed, like she'd seen the question burn through her 100 times. Because he can. Ethan leaned forward. "There's more." "There always is," Clara said, breath shaking. "He wasn't going to stop at dragging me. He said he'd take the baby too, raise her as his." She closed her eyes. "I couldn't let that happen." Maggie covered her mouth, whispering, "Dear Lord." Ethan felt the weight of every choice in the room shift, like the Lord had just placed a ledger on the table and waited to see how each of them would sign their names. "Why here?" he asked. Clara hesitated. "I followed the ridge. Snow hid my trail. I prayed for something. A light. A chance." She looked at the fire, then back at him. "And I saw your lantern." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Ethan stood, setting the rifle against the wall with a hard click. "We'll talk more when you're stronger." "I leave at first light," Clara said again, trying to sound certain. "You're not leaving anything." Ethan's voice didn't rise, but it carried the weight of command. "You'd make it 10 yards before the cold killed you. And if the Marshal doesn't find you first, the wolves will." Clara's fingers tightened around the blanket. "You don't understand. Keeping me here puts you and your child in danger." Ethan moved to the door, checking the latch, then the windows. "Ma'am," he said without turning, "danger found this cabin the moment he laid hands on you." He looked back at her. "Staying or leaving won't change that." Clara stared at him, fear, disbelief, gratitude all tangled tight behind her eyes, but she said nothing. Maggie laid a cup of warm broth beside the bed. "Drink when you can. You'll need strength." Clara's hand shook as she reached for it. She managed only a sip before setting it down with trembling fingers. Ethan adjusted the quilt, more gently than he meant to. "You rest. One night won't fix him, but it might keep you alive long enough to decide what happens next." Clara whispered, "You don't owe me anything." Ethan didn't answer at first. He walked back to the chair, sat, and spoke quietly, like a man stating a fact, not offering kindness. "Ma'am, nobody deserves to freeze on my land." Outside, the wind rose, slamming against the logs like a warning coming from the dark. And somewhere beneath that roar, faint but certain, a horse's hoof struck snow. Not close, but coming. Snow softened as the afternoon wore thin, but the wind hadn't lost its edge. It pressed at the windows like a warning, trying to find a crack big enough to slip inside. Ethan sat by the table, sharpening his knife. A slow, steady scrape that matched the rhythm of a man sorting through too many questions at once. Maggie ladled broth into a tin cup. The baby slept in the cradle, cheek flushed with new warmth. Breaths quiet but steady enough to ease the ache in her chest. Clara lay propped against pillows, eyes half open. Fever faded to a hot shimmer beneath her skin. She watched Ethan without saying a word, the way someone watches a stranger holding both salvation and judgment in the same hand. "You drink more," Maggie said softly. "You're still shaking." Clara took the cup but didn't raise it. Instead, her fingers drifted to the front of her blouse, torn, frayed from rope. She hesitated, as if weighing whether truth was safer than silence. "Maggie," she whispered, I need something from inside here." Ethan's head lifted. Inside where? Clara drew a trembling breath and slipped her hand beneath the quilt, into the hidden seam of her underdress. Her fingers found a small lump stitched into the lining. She winced, pulling it free, a cloth-wrapped packet no bigger than a man's palm. The moment it touched the light, Maggie gasped. Ethan stood. "What is that?" he asked. Clara held the packet as if it burned her. "Proof," she whispered. "Enough to end him, or enough to end me." Ethan approached slow, like he would a wounded animal deciding whether to bite. "Show me." Clara's hand trembled harder. "If I open it, there's no turning back. If you see it, you'll be part of it." "We're already part of it," Ethan said. Storm saw to that. She looked at Maggie. Gentle face, steady hands, eyes full of the kind of stubborn mercy most folks didn't carry anymore. Then Clara loosened the string. Inside lay a folded piece of ledger paper, edges rubbed soft from hiding. A page torn clean from an account book. Inked names, sums, signatures from men whose pockets were deep and whose consciences were empty. And pinned to it were letters. 3 of them. Each addressed to Marshal Voss. Each sealed with the stamp of local merchants, town officials, and a judge Ethan recognized by the bold curl of his signature. Maggie's breath hitched. "These are bribes." "Payments," Clara corrected, voice flat. "He arrested men who owed nothing, seized property from widows, buried evidence that wasn't convenient. They paid him to make their troubles disappear." Ethan stared at the paper. Every number read like a confession. "How'd you get this?" he asked. Clara's jaw tightened. "He doesn't know I know where he hides things, or that I can read. Took me months to gather these without him noticing." Maggie whispered, "He'd kill you for this." Clara nodded once. Slow, certain. "He meant to. That night. Said a wife's place was to obey. And if I couldn't, he'd replace me." Ethan looked toward the cradle. The implication hung heavy in the air. "He wants the baby," Clara said sharply, as if ripping the truth open all at once. "Not because she's his. She ain't. Because she gives him leverage. Power. Men like him crave power the way wolves crave blood." Ethan folded the ledger page gently, as if the truth might spill off the paper if he breathed too hard. "This alone won't stop him," he warned. "No," Clara agreed. "But if I bring it to the sheriff, you think the sheriff will stand against a federal badge?" Ethan cut in. Clara's eyes flickered. She already knew that answer. Ethan stepped back, thinking, breathing through the weight of what he held. "Who else knows about this?" "No one," Clara said. "Not anymore." Maggie swallowed. "What do you want us to do?" Clara closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling the edges of her voice thin. "I wanted to get far enough away to pass this to someone who'd use it right. A preacher. A circuit judge. Anyone not in his pocket." She looked at Ethan. I didn't plan on making it here. Just prayed I'd get far enough for the baby to live. Maggie touched Clara's hand. You're not alone now. Clara opened her eyes again. Tired, but sharpened with something new. Resolve, maybe. Or the memory of who she'd been before fear carved her smaller. Ethan refolded the papers and stepped toward the shelf. We hide it. Where? Maggie asked. His gaze drifted to the cradle. No, Clara's voice cracked. He'll check the child first. Maggie glanced around the cabin, then whispered, The doll. Ethan frowned. What doll? Maggie crossed to the small trunk where she kept the few toys left from Lily's childhood. She pulled out a raggedy cloth doll with a missing button eye. Rose made her, Maggie said quietly. But she'd want her used for something good. Ethan hesitated only a moment before nodding. It'll do. Clara watched them tuck the folded ledger into the doll's stuffed belly, Maggie stitching it closed with Rose's old needle, every pull of the thread sealing another secret. When she finished, Maggie placed the doll gently in the cradle beside the sleeping baby. Clara exhaled, the sound half relief, half grief. Ethan stood with his back to the fire, rifle near, shadows deep across his face. You listen to me, Clara, he said. Whatever storm you walked out of, it ain't finished. And when a man with a badge wants something as bad as he wants you, he'll ride through hell to get it. Clara didn't look away. I know. Then understand this, Ethan said. You brought war to my doorstep. And now that I've seen what's in that packet, his voice dropped. I ain't letting you face it alone. Outside, the wind died for a takang, breath. Just long enough to hear a distant echo, like a horse shifting weight in the snow. Coming. Not soon, but certain. Night came down heavy, thick, and mean, like the kind the Lord used to test what was left inside a person. Ethan lit 2 more lamps, pushing back the dark only far enough to keep the fear from pooling in the corners of the room. Clara sat against the pillows, quilt wrapped tight. Color found its way back to her cheeks, though her hands still trembled beneath the wool. The baby slept by the hearth, chest rising and falling steady as a tide. Maggie checked the windows again, then again. Her eyes kept drifting toward the ridge, as if waiting for something she prayed would never appear. It was Clara who broke the quiet. I should go. Ethan didn't look up from the table where he was oiling his rifle. You can't. I can. Clara swung her legs off the bed. Her feet hit the floor. Pain shot up her body, but she grit her teeth. He's close. I feel it. I won't risk your lives another minute. Maggie stepped forward immediately, hands out. You can barely stand. You leave now. You die out there. Better me than you two. That ain't how this house works, Ethan said, voice flat. Clara's breath shook. You don't understand. He's not a man who gives up. Not a man who misses. If he finds me here, Ethan snapped the chamber shut on his rifle. The sound cracked through the cabin like a verdict. He won't find you. You don't know that, Clara pressed. I know the ridge. He finally looked at her. And I know the kind of men storms bring. Clara forced herself upright, gripping the bedpost to steady the fever still rattling in her bones. I'm leaving when the moon rises. No, Ethan said. You ain't. Yes, she whispered, Staying put's that child, she nodded toward the cradle, in the Marshal's path. Ethan's jaw clenched. His voice went hard. That child's been in the Lord's hands since the second Maggie lifted her from your arms. And so have you. Clara shook her head, panic pushing her forward. You don't know him. When he wants something. A sound cut her off. Distant, soft, but unmistakable. Hoofbeats. Not close, not far. Just enough to turn every drop of blood inside the cabin cold. Maggie gasped. Ethan! I hear it. He moved to the window in 3 strides, lifting the edge of the curtain just enough to see the ridge. Nothing yet. Just dark and more dark. But the hoofbeats came again. Not 1 horse. 2. Clara sagged against the bedpost. He found me. Ethan let the curtain fall. Not yet. Clara's voice cracked. He will. Maggie grabbed Ethan's arm, fingers tight. We have to move her, hide her, something. We can't hide what ain't meant to disappear, Ethan said. Then, more quietly, and she's too weak to run. Clara swallowed hard. I'll crawl if I have to. No. Ethan stepped in front of her. You ain't going anywhere tonight. Ethan, that wagon of yours hit the drift less than half a mile from here. Storm does half the work, but not all of it. A man who knows what he's looking for'll find the wreck. And from there, he'll track straight to your door, Clara finished. Ethan didn't deny it. Silence claimed the room for a long moment. The kind of silence that wasn't empty, but full, stuffed with choices and consequences. Then Ethan spoke, each word deliberate. You get 3 days. Clara blinked. What? 3. He held up the fingers. 1 night ain't enough to get you on your feet. And if we don't get ahead of him, running'll kill you before he does. Maggie stared at him. 3 days? Ethan? It's what we need, he said. Storm'll cover more tracks. Snow'll mask scent. Gives me time to scout the ridge, set watch, talk to a man or 2 in town who ain't in the Marshal's pocket. Clara shook her head violently. No, you don't get it. When he's angry, he doesn't stop to think. He doesn't sleep, He'll sleep, Ethan said. Men like him always do after they convince themselves they're right. Clara's knees buckled, and Maggie caught her before she hit the ground. They eased her back onto the bed, quilt drawn higher. 3 days, Ethan repeated. Storm's on our side. For once. Clara buried her face in her hands. You're risking everything. Ma'am, Ethan said, voice low, solid as a church bell on Sunday. I've buried 2 graves on this land. I ain't digging a 3rd, because a coward with a badge scared you into thinking your life ain't worth saving. Clara's breath broke. Maggie moved to the cradle, fixing the doll beside the baby like a guardian. She shot Ethan a look, half fear, half faith, then turned down the lantern wick. Outside, the hoofbeats faded into the distance. Not gone, just circling, waiting for dawn to guide them the rest of the way. Clara whispered into the quiet. Why 3 days? Ethan didn't look back as he checked the door latch again. Because that's how long it'll take, he said, to make sure when he finally comes, he won't be the one going home. Snowfall eased by morning, but the cold had sharpened to a blade. Ethan stepped out before dawn, scanned the ridge, then circled the barn twice, checking prints, checking shadows, checking for anything out of place. Storm had wiped most signs clean, but not all of them. Someone had ridden close in the night. Too close. By the time he stepped back into the cabin, Maggie already had coffee on the stove. Clara sat upright in the bed, wrapped tight in the quilt, eyes hollow from a night of too much breath and too little sleep. The baby lay tucked against her, small and warm and still alive because the Lord had chosen to be merciful one more night. "You didn't sleep," Maggie whispered to Ethan. "Didn't plan to." Clara lifted her gaze. "He's near, isn't he?" Ethan didn't answer, which was answer enough. He had just set his rifle against the wall when a knock came. Not a pounding knock, not the desperate kind, but a polite, measured tapping. 3 taps, soft, smiling, the way someone knocks when he's already decided he's welcome. Maggie froze. Clara's breath snagged in her throat. Ethan lifted one hand, a silent command to stay still, then moved toward the door with the steps of a man who'd done this dance before. Another knock, same rhythm. "Mr. Stone," a voice called, warm as honey poured over poison. "Mind if I trouble you a moment?" Clara pressed the baby closer to her chest. "It's him," she mouthed. Ethan placed one finger to his lips, grabbed the rifle, and opened the door just enough to fill the doorway with his shoulders. The man outside smiled like a Sunday preacher. Snow dusted his hat brim, coat clean, boots polished, badge gleaming on his chest. Marshal Voss. "Well," Voss drawled, "good morning to you, sir. Fine day the Lord's given us." Ethan didn't answer. Didn't invite him in. Voss glanced past Ethan's shoulder, like a man pretending not to be looking for something specific. "Storm was fierce last night. Rode the ridge twice just to make sure no poor soul froze in the dark." "No one here froze," Ethan said. "That's so." Voss smiled wider. "Glad to hear it. I was hoping to step inside a spell. Warm these old bones." "No need," Ethan replied. "Coffee's thin this morning." "Coffee don't matter." Voss's eyes narrowed slightly, though his smile never moved. "It's fellowship a man needs on a cold day." Ethan didn't budge. Voss sighed softly, as though disappointed in the world, not the man. "Truth be told, Mr. Stone, I'm looking for my wife. She wandered off in the storm last night. Folks are worried for her safety." Behind Ethan, Clara pressed her knuckles to her mouth to keep from making a sound. Maggie tightened her grip on the cradle. Ethan kept his gaze steady. "You're a marshal. You lose things often?" Voss chuckled. "Women get flighty sometimes, especially ones with delicate minds. My poor Clara. She ain't been tranta herself. Doctor says storms trouble her." His voice dipped. "You seen anything unusual on your land this morning?" "No." "Tracks? Wagon damage? Signs of someone passing through?" "Storm covered everything." Voss leaned, just a hair, as though trying to look past Ethan into the cabin. Ethan lifted the rifle slightly, not pointing, just showing. Voss straightened with a gracious nod. "Now, I didn't mean anything by it." "Good," Ethan said, "because I don't take kindly to strangers prying." Voss tapped the snow off his glove. "Just doing my duty. I fear my wife might be hurt, might even be losing blood." He let the words hang, heavy and slick. "If she's wound up somewhere she shouldn't be, well, that'd be a tragedy." Ethan's jaw flexed once. "You done?" "Almost." Voss tipped his hat. If you see her or anything of hers, you send word. I'll be back with a search party and a warrant by nightfall if I don't find sign of her." Warrant. The word slid into the cabin like a knife under a door. "Yes, sir," Voss added lightly. "I'll come with scripture and law behind me. Hard to argue with either one." He stepped back, smiling that soft serpent's smile. As he turned to leave, his eyes drifted to the snow near the porch. A faint set of smaller prints, half covered but not gone. Child's prints, Maggie's. But he didn't know that. Or he did. Voss touched the prints briefly with his boot, as if testing their depth, then looked up at Ethan with a knowing little nod. "Fine morning, Mr. Stone," he said. "See you before sundown." Ethan shut the door hard enough to shake the lantern hooks. Clara's breath broke loose. "He knows. Ethan, he knows." "He suspects," Ethan corrected. "He'll be back," Clara whispered. "He won't come alone." "I know." Maggie touched Clara's shoulder. "We'll think of something." Ethan checked the rifle, jaw tight enough to crack teeth. "Thinking won't be enough. If he's bringing a warrant, then we need to be gone before he uses it." Clara stared at him, pale and shaking. "Gone where?" "Town," Ethan said. "Doctor, supplies. Someone there owes me a truth or two." Maggie's breath caught. "You're taking her out? Now?" Ethan nodded once. "Storm's lifting. If Voss is coming back by sundown, we've got till noon to get what we need." Clara clutched the quilt closer. "Ethan, if he finds me in town, then he'll have a problem he didn't plan for," Ethan said. "And I'll be standing right beside it." The wind outside rose in a low wail, rattling the window pane like fingers tapping from the wrong side of heaven. Clara closed her eyes. "Lord, protect us." And for a moment, just one, the wind fell quiet, as if listening. The sun broke through the storm like a dull blade, weak, cold, and late to its duty. Ethan hitched the wagon with quick, practiced movements, checking the harness twice, then once more for good measure. Snow groaned beneath his boots. Every sound felt too loud, too revealing. Maggie wrapped Clara in a heavier shawl, tucking the edges under her arms. "You sure you can sit upright?" "I have to," Clara said, voice thin but steady. "If I can't, he's already won." Ethan helped her into the wagon seat. She winced when her stitched hand brushed the rail. Maggie climbed in beside her, baby held tight against her chest, the patched doll tucked beneath the blanket. Ethan swung up onto the driver's bench. "Stay low," he said. "If trouble comes, we don't wait to see if it's friendly." Clara nodded, pulling the shawl higher. "He'll be watching the roads. And I'll be watching him." They started down the slope, wheels creaking over frozen ruts. The world felt too bright, the kind of bright that makes a hunted person feel naked. Clara kept her eyes on the tree line, half expecting a badge to glint between branches. But they reached the outskirts of town without incident. That was when the stares began. Women paused mid-step, clutching baskets tighter. Men on porches stopped whittling. A pair of farmhands leaned on their pitchforks, following the wagon with flat, unfriendly eyes. Maggie whispered, "Lord above, they already heard." Ethan didn't respond. He didn't need to. He felt the shift same as she did, the town gathering itself like a jury. They passed the smithy. Hammering stopped. Jed Miller, tall and broad-shouldered, wiped his hands on a rag. He looked at Ethan, then at Clara, then at the baby. His jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Ethan nodded once, a quiet greeting between men who understood loss. From the boardwalk came a different sound entirely. The Marshal's wife. Run off. Crazy, they say. What kind of woman abandons? Clara hunched lower, face hidden beneath the shawl. A shopkeeper's wife pointed straight at her. Shameful, the woman hissed. Just shameful, leaving a federal officer sick with worry, dragging her sins through the snow. Ethan pulled the reins hard enough the horse snorted. That's enough, he said. The woman flinched, but not much. We're good Christians here, Mr. Stone. We mind our morals. Ethan's voice came out like ground iron. Then mind your own. He urged the horse forward, jaw tight. They reached the doctor's office. Ethan helped Clara down, keeping her close, as if the town itself might lash out if she came within arm's reach. Inside, the doctor rinsed his hands, frowning at Clara's stitched wounds. These rope burns, he muttered. Fresh, deep. Whoever did this is not here, Ethan cut in. Just patch what needs patching. The doctor wrapped Clara's wrists carefully, pausing only once to meet her eyes. You're safe for the moment, ma'am. Clara swallowed. Safe's a strong word. Ethan stood guard by the door until they were done. Then they made their way to the general store, picking up flour, matches, lamp oil. But trouble met them before they reached the counter. A deputy leaned against a stack of feed sacks, arms crossed, badge gleaming. Stone, he drawled. Heard the Marshal's riding through. Says he's looking for his wife. Ethan didn't slow. He can keep looking. The deputy eyed Clara. Funny thing. Heard she might be unstable. Clara stiffened. Maggie snapped back before Ethan could. She ain't unstable. She's wounded. That's different. The deputy pushed off the wall. Marshal says she's got fits. Says she's dangerous if cornered. Ethan stepped between him and the women. What Marshal Voss says and what's true don't tend to match. That so? The deputy smirked. Funny, 'cause the Marshal served this town longer than you've lived on that ridge. Ethan didn't blink. Everything dies. Reputations, too. The deputy's smirk faded. Before he could retort, Jed Miller stepped through the doorway, boots heavy, stare harder. You bothering these folks, Pete? The deputy swiveled. I ain't bothering nobody. Jed folded his arms. Sure looked like it. Silence stretched until the deputy backed away, muttering about coddling runaways and soft men. Jed turned to Ethan. You need anything? Ethan shook his head. Got it handled. Jed nodded toward Clara. One respectful tilt, no judgment. If trouble finds you, Stone, you know where my forge stands. Ethan's reply was quiet. I do. They loaded the wagon again. As Ethan climbed onto the bench, Clara whispered, Why did he help us? Jed? Maggie answered. 'Cause his wife buried half her heart last winter. Folks who've known grief see it in others. Ethan flicked the reins. They rolled out of town, but the weight of 100 watching eyes followed them to the last building. Only when the first bend of the ridge hid the rooftops did Clara finally let out a shaky breath. Town's against me, she whispered. No, Ethan said. Town's scared of him. That's different. But fear chooses sides. Ethan didn't disagree. Clouds gathered at the far edge of the valley. Snow again, heavy, dark, and coming fast. Maggie pulled the baby closer. We better get home before sundown. Clara looked back toward the silent town, its windows glinting like watchful eyes, and trembled. It felt like a courtroom, she whispered. Every step. Ethan flicked a glance her way, voice low but certain. Then we'll give them something worth judging. The sun had fallen behind the ridge by the time Ethan found the tracks. 2 horses dragging a third rider who could barely stay upright. Snow churned in violent swirls where they'd passed. Clara's scarf lay torn on a branch like a flag begging someone, anyone, to follow. Ethan kicked his horse harder. Whitmore Station rose out of the dusk like a broken tooth. Old telegraph shack, roof caved in, windows patched with scrap tin. Voss always chose lonely places. Easier to sin when the Lord wasn't watching through the eyes of neighbors. Ethan dismounted silent as shadow, rifle ready. Voices carried through the cracked boards. Voss first. Calm. Too calm. Clara, you've embarrassed me enough. Then Clara, weak, breathless, but still refusing to fold. Let me go. A slap cracked through the cold. Ethan's vision tunneled. He moved fast, boot blasting the door off its hinge. Wood shattered. Snow swirled in. 2 deputies reached for their guns, but Ethan was quicker, rifle leveled, jaw locked. Drop 'em. They hesitated, but whatever they saw in Ethan's face convinced them the Lord wouldn't give them time for a second mistake. Metal clattered to the floor. Voss stood behind Clara, one hand gripping her injured wrist. Clara swayed, barely conscious, blood drying along her temple. Marshal, Ethan said, voice low as thunder. Let her go. Voss smiled like a man greeting an old friend. Mr. Stone, took you long enough? Clara's knees buckled. Ethan lunged forward, fast enough she didn't hit the ground. He caught her, pulling her behind him, one arm braced like a shield. Stand back, Voss warned. She's my wife. No, Ethan said. She's a woman you beat, and the next time you reach for her will be your last. Voss laughed softly. You think you get to decide what happens here? I do tonight. Ethan kicked a deputy's revolver toward Clara. She stared at it, breath hitching, hand trembling. Slowly, painfully, she reached down, wrapping her fingers around the cold iron. Voss's smile faltered for the first time. Clara drew the gun up, pointed it at his chest. Her arm shook, not from fear, but from all the nights she'd stayed silent, all the bruises she'd hidden, all the prayers answered too late and too early at once. Clara, Voss murmured, suddenly careful. You don't want to do that. I don't know what I want, she whispered, but I know what I won't be anymore. Her finger tightened. Ethan didn't breathe. Voss's deputies didn't blink. For one heartbeat, justice hovered in the space between 2 people who had once shared a home and now shared nothing but the memory of pain. Then Clara's hand dropped, gun lowering, shoulders collapsing. No, she whispered. I won't be like you. Voss's eyes narrowed, calculating, restoring arrogance in the space the bullet never claimed. And then he lunged. Clara gasped. Ethan fired first. The shot tore across the wall, missing Voss by inches as the Marshal dove behind a beam, drawing his own revolver in a blur. Move, Ethan shouted, dragging Clara toward the doorway. Gunfire exploded behind them, metal screaming off timber, snow spraying inward like a white firestorm. Clara stumbled, gripping Ethan's coat, breath ragged. Her mercy had spared Voss. Her mercy had also unleashed the next bullet aimed for them, and the next shot, Ethan knew it, would not miss. Ethan didn't register the bullet at first, just the violent shove backward, the cold slam of snow, Clara's gasp beside him. Pain came a heartbeat later, sharp and deep, spreading hot down his side. Inside the ruined station, Voss staggered into view, pistol up, eyes bright with spite. "You should have stayed out of this, Stone." Clara reacted first. She scooped a handful of snow and flung it into Voss's face. He cursed, blinking. Ethan fired. The bullet tore into the wall inches from the Marshal, forcing him behind a timber beam. "Move!" Ethan hissed, grabbing Clara's arm with his good hand. She hauled him toward the horses, half dragging, half lifting, legs slipping through the snow. One deputy chased them, gun shaking, but a shotgun blast from the ridge knocked him flat. Jed Miller thundered into view with Hank Whitlow behind him. "Hurry!" Jed yelled. "We'll hold him!" Clara boosted Ethan onto his horse, climbed up behind him, and locked her arms tight around his ribs to keep him upright. They rode hard into the night, Ethan swaying, blood dripping into the snow town. Near midnight, they reached the doctor's porch with barely enough strength for one knock. Dr. Patterson opened the door instantly, eyes widening at Ethan's slumped form. "Through and through," Patterson muttered as he cut open the coat. "Another inch, and you'd be meeting the Lord tonight." Ethan grunted, but stayed silent. Clara reached into Maggie's rag doll, fingers shaking, and pulled out the evidence. Ledgers, letters, bank seals, all intact. "Maggie hid these," Clara whispered. "She saved them. And us." Patterson bound the wound, then pointed toward the sheriff's office. "Hank needs to see that now." Sheriff's office. 1 hour later. Sheriff Hank Whitlow read the documents slowly, jaw tightening until the muscles quivered. "This is enough to bury him," he said, "and enough to free you." Ethan, pale but standing, nodded once. "Make it official." Hank sealed the documents with wax, pressing his stamp hard. "Judge'll convene before dawn. Get some rest. You're testifying." Clara stood straighter despite exhaustion. "I'll be there." Makeshift court. Dawn. By morning, the whole town had gathered, some angry, some curious, most afraid of what truth might demand of them. Clara sat beside Ethan. Maggie perched in her lap, clutching the doll like a shield. The baby slept against her shoulder. Judge Morrison called the hearing to order. Clara testified, steady, quiet, each word cutting sharper than shouted accusations. Ethan testified next, voice low but iron hard. Jed and Hank followed, filling in the pieces Clara couldn't. Finally, Voss limped forward, coat torn, pride bruised deeper than flesh. He called her unstable. He called Ethan a conspirator. He called the evidence forged. But every denial only fed the fire already burning against him. When the judge pressed, Voss snapped. He reached for his gun. Time fractured. Clara yanked Maggie down. Ethan shifted to shield them, wounded shoulder screaming. Hank fired before Voss could lift the barrel. The Marshal collapsed, badge clattering across the floor, like a verdict delivered by heaven itself. The room fell silent. Judge Morrison exhaled. "Charges dismissed. Warrants forthcoming for the Marshal's associates." No applause. Just release. Heavy, long overdue. The ranch. Late afternoon. Snow had softened, falling gentle now, like the storm had finally exhausted its rage. Maggie ran ahead up the porch steps, boots thudding. Clara walked beside Ethan, steadying him with one hand on his uninjured arm. She didn't ask permission. He didn't pull away. At the doorway, Ethan paused. The house, quiet, warm, lived in again, felt different, felt possible. "You don't owe me anything," Clara murmured. "Maybe not." Ethan's voice was rough, softened by pain and something deeper. "But the door's open, if you want it." Clara looked at Maggie playing in the snow, at the baby sleeping safe in her arms, at the cabin lit from within like a lantern finally found. Then she stepped through the doorway first. Ethan followed, closing the world out behind them. Not forever, but enough for the night, enough to begin again.